So a little while ago, I made a video talking about the absolute banger DreamWorks classic, The Prince of Egypt, which is perhaps their greatest ever film. Maybe you disagree, but it's my favourite at least. And during the course of that video, I maybe said a few disparaging things about some of DreamWorks' other traditionally animated works, and I did get a bit of pushback, and that was for Sinbad and for Spirit. Those were the two films that seemed to have defenders, or the most defenders. And for Sinbad, I think I said it crashed and burned, and that Spirit was simply a decent film, a bit mid, but in the end, forgettable. And I kind of stand by my thoughts on Sinbad, I'm sorry. It has bad reviews for starters, and not just critics but audiences as well, 45% and 56% respectively, which is pretty terrible all things considered, and it was a massive box office bomb. It earned 80 million off 60 million. It almost killed the studio, and this is the final traditional animated film they ever made. It doesn't feel like a coincidence. So yeah, maybe I'll do a deeper dive on Sinbad someday, but for now I think we have to sort of accept that it isn't the greatest movie. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but it failed on all the sniff tests. Sorry. And so this leads us to Spirit, and look, let's straighten something out. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I didn't crap on this movie all that hard. I just said it was kind of there. But I'll give it a rewatch and I'll report back. Because at this point, even my girlfriend's looking at me, shaking her head at me, even slightly criticizing it. I do stand by my statements though, mostly surrounding its success. I do not think it did very well, mostly because it was also a box office flop. It grossed 120 million off 80 million. That's not as bad as Sinbad, but it's not good either. And it's certainly one of the contributing factors to the near death of the studio. Thank God for Shrek and Shrek 2, otherwise bye to DreamWorks. But that being said, the reviews did give me hope. It has a 69% critical score and a 77% audience score, and that's good. Although, I was a bit baffled when I read the review blurb for the film. It says, Spirit is a visually stunning film that may be too predictable and politically correct for adults, but should serve children well. What? Too politically correct? So let me guess. The adults might be angry the colonial American characters are kind of the bad guys in the frontier setting, despite that being historically accurate more than not. But of course, the kids will enjoy it because it's genuinely a fun movie. That's my takeaway, and it's a bit of a yikes. Guess the world was not ready back in 2002 for the truth. But yeah, let's get cracking. Okay, so we've had a time skip, and I watched the movie, and holy shit, this was an epic film. One that made me rather sad that it failed because it deserves to succeed. And well, nothing else for it but to go through why the movie was so damn good, right? Let's go! Okay, so we start off the film with one of the best shots in the history of animation. I know, I've already flip-flopped hard, deal with it. But yeah, it's an epic shot. It's one of those shots that makes you think, oh, why couldn't this film have been so successful, broken the box office? Why couldn't traditional animation have survived? I know it's still used, let's be real though, it's a gimmick. The big studios only crack it out from time to time for a bit of variety. It doesn't get the same focus, it doesn't get the same development. Compare the visuals of this to Golden Age Disney, then to the height of the Renaissance. This was a whole new level. They were pushing forward the genre, committing money and resources. I really wonder how it would all look today if they'd taken off and made a lot of money off this thing. If DreamWorks had kept this direction and it had become their signature style or compelled Disney to try and keep up with it. Traditional animation arms race. Infusing that computer stuff too. Oh well. And we follow this up with some classic narration. I love this sort of open to a film. The epic music, nature shots, and then, I don't know how to describe it, but it's kind of almost pretentious narration. Not in a bad way. I really don't know how to phrase it, but you get me, I hope. Nowadays, if there is a narrated opening to an animated film, it's going to be quirky and goofy. But here, it just has a different aura. It's a bygone era. Anyway, the narration talks about the Old West and how it's about horses, yada yada yada, spirit of the land, you get me. Not really important to the story, but more about building the aura, hooking you with a charismatic voice and epic shots. Some of them, like this close-up of the wild horses running, they have aged slightly by the standards of today, but my god, audiences back then would have had their minds blown. In this section, after the narration, or during the gap between narration, we get a look at the early life of Spirit, his childhood, his deep bond with his mum, and his eventual rise to leader of the herd, like his father before him. Do we meet his dad? Did he die off screen? Oh well. But I thought it was a really brave and interesting choice to not have the horses speak at all, like you'd see in pretty much every other animated film about animals. It's risky, but in the end, I think it works well. You get all that information, all that emotion, and they don't need the words. And I think it helps the film feel unique in that way. Also, at the same time, a classic DreamWorks trope. A montage over the top of a banger song. Here I Am, what a classic. Also, Hans Zimmer, what the hell? Dude's everywhere, dropping fire wherever he goes. What a beast. Anyway, Spirit's living the dream. He's whooping the ass of cougars. The animal, like the wildcat. not the 40-plus woman in leopard print. And he's already become a hero to the next generation of horsies. Until one fateful night he notices a fire in the distance and hears a harmonica playing. And this is the point that it clicked for me. Like, they even mentioned the Old West and the frontier and whatever. But this is where it clicked. Holy shit, this is a Western. Hell yeah, love me a Western. As a non-American, to me, they are the quintessential American experience. I don't care if it's no longer realistic. Give me some of that. It's the best genre by far. As long as they don't go for the hardcore racism, then they're really, really good. And I've always been sad they don't get made all that often. They make you nostalgic for a bygone era. And I'm not even American, like I said. And yet, I'm hearing the harmonica, and I'm back to my youth. I'm roaming the trails of, I don't know, the Oklahoma Panhandle. You get what I mean? Westerns are just peak nostalgia for me for some reason. I don't know why. Anyway, Spirit finds some wranglers. They've captured some horses. And whilst this scene ends up being pretty sad because he gets captured to be broken in and used by the US cavalry, it starts off pretty funny when he nuzzles one of the dudes and the guy says, "Oh, so to me." Maybe a wife, maybe a prostitute. Who can really say? It was 2002 and they had interesting standards. And so they chase him and in the end he gets caught. And the scene where they take him down, team up on him and rope his legs, half sad, but also it just gets so angry. Like, double teaming him, that's not fair. Go one-on-one, you cowards. And then him telling his mum to leave him behind. Oh, why am I so emotional? They're horses. And it's only 20 minutes in. They got me crying about a horse mum losing her son. Oh, just the noises, the whines, the whinnies. Oh, I'm sad. Then we have another song montage, and this one's probably not as good as the first one, but they make up for it with great scenic animation. Then we move from lush green plains into desert or badlands or whatever this is. I'm not an expert. But it's a pretty general Wild West setting. That's what we're dealing with here. And then from sad to bleak to a bit of a comedy montage. Good, you gotta have some variety. Gotta move on from the sad shit, otherwise it's too much. And said comedy montage follows the attempts of the bumbling cavalrymen to try to break Spirit's spirit. But he won't budge, he's biting, hitting, kicking the farrier up the arse. Like seriously, that dude goes through the wars. Bad luck, Murphy. And so after Murphy's KO'd by a headbutt, trying to give him the US cavalry brand, the colonel decides it's time to break him in himself. And so, it's time for another song montage. And really, this section's just a continuation of that theme, that Spirit has the unbreakable spirit, as he bucks off every single cavalryman who tries to break him in, before the colonel finally takes true notice of him and decides that psychological warfare is the way to go for this horse. So he gets tied to a post and left out in the sun with no food or water for 3 days. Brutal. But would this not actually just kill an animal in real life? A quick Google search says that 5 days without water is probably the maximum they can go before death. Well, the maximum a horse can go before death. But ill effects are going to show up within 2 days. He's not going to be able to break out and charge across the desert with Little Creek. And on top of that, I doubt those stats are taking into account that the horse is being baked in the hot, hot sun, unable to seek any shade. Yikes. We then have some interludes during his punishment as well. The first is Spirit looking up at the night sky and thinking about his mum and his herd and how he misses them, and there's sad music playing, and they do this half fade where you can see both their faces and it's all just sad. And then we finally meet Little Creek, a Lakota man who's been captured and is pretty much given the same treatment as Spirit. And this is where my dumbass realized for the first time that they were intentionally drawing parallels between Spirit's plight, his desire to be free, and stay in his own land with his own customs away from the intervention of the USA, and the plight of the native peoples during the westward expansion and Manifest Destiny, aka the genocide era of America. And it doesn't really change anything in the film for me. I just think it's cool, a good link. But suddenly, that Rotten Tomatoes blurb about the film being too PC makes more sense, because people are probably smarter than me and realized that connection way before I did. I guess people in 2002 did not want to acknowledge the wrongs of their forefathers. No idea if that's changed at all, but as an Australian, we have a similar history here. And I'll just put it like this: most folks don't care, so I doubt it's much different.